Stories travel farther than we imagine. What city are you listening from? They didn't think they were buying a man. In their eyes, they were bidding on a monument, a statue carved from obsidian and muscle. It was 1867, a time when the world was changing, yet in this dusty corner of the Deep South, the old ways clung like kudzu to a dying oak. His name was Silas, but they didn't ask his name. They whispered about his height, 7 feet 5 inches of raw power. The auctioneer's voice didn't boom, it trembled with a greedy excitement. He wasn't selling a field hand, he was selling a spectacle. The crowd wasn't looking at a human being with a beating heart. They were looking at a beast of burden that could pull a plow without a mule. They saw the width of his shoulders and calculated profit. They saw the symmetry of his jawline and saw a trophy. But they missed the most dangerous thing about him. They were so obsessed with the size of his hands, they never stopped to wonder what those hands were capable of creating. They saw a destroyer. Silas was a grower. Mr. Calloway had bought himself a reputation. He wanted the giant to intimidate his rivals, to clear the heavy stones from the new creek bed, to be the brute force that saved his failing farm. He paid a fortune for muscle. He didn't know he had just purchased a miracle. The orders were simple. Break the rocks, move the earth, use the body. Calloway looked at Silas and said, "You are here to lift what no other man can lift. Do not speak, do not think, just work." He wanted a machine. He wanted the 7'5" spectacle to sweat until he dropped. But when the sun went down and the masters of men retreated to their parlors to drink and boast, Silas went to work. Not the work they commanded, but the work his soul demanded. To Calloway, this was just dirt, dead and useless. But Silas could hear the earth speaking. He could smell the acidity, the lack of nitrogen, the thirst of the roots. Back home, before the chains, his grandfather had taught him that the soil is a living skin. If you treat it like a sleeve, it rebels. If you treat it like a lover, it gives you everything. He saw what they couldn't. He saw that the drainage was wrong. He saw that the crops were fighting each other for sunlight. They bought him for his back, but his power was in his mind. He was an agricultural savant in a world that only wanted him to be a monster. And there, in the quiet dark, the giant began to garden. Weeks bled into months. The county was suffering. A drought had settled over the South like a heavy wool blanket, suffocating the cotton and burning the corn. Men prayed for rain, but the sky offered only relentless, mocking blue. Yet on the Calloway farm, a mystery was growing. "It's devilry, Calloway," the neighbor spat. "How is your soil holding water? My creek bed is bone dry." Calloway didn't have an answer. He looked at the strange mounds of earth, the odd, curving trenches that Silas had dug in the dead of night. Calloway hadn't ordered them. He had ordered straight lines. These lines were curved, organic, like the veins of a leaf. He felt a prickle of fear, not gratitude that his crops were alive, but fear that he had lost control. Ignorance often masquerades as authority. Calloway stomped through the dust, his face red with heat and anger. He saw the giant digging a trench across the main path. "What are you doing?" Calloway screamed. "I told you to clear the rocks, not dig graves for my land." Silas tried to show him. He tried to mime the coming rains, the way this trench would save the topsoil from washing away. But Calloway didn't speak the language of the earth. He only spoke the language of the whip. "Fill it in," Calloway ordered, his voice cracking. "You ruin my lines. You make my farm look like a savage's jungle. Fill it in now." The sky broke. It wasn't salvation, it was violence. The drought had baked the earth into a hard shell, unable to absorb water. When the rain finally came, it didn't soak in, it rushed. A wall of water began to build from the hills, roaring toward the valley farms. "The barn!" Calloway shrieked. "The water is coming for the barn! Move the wagons! Move the—" But the roar drowned him out.
The water hit the neighboring field first. It stripped the land bare in seconds. It is total destruction. The flood slammed into the Callaway property. But then, something impossible happened. The water didn't rush. It hit Silas's curve, swirled, slowed down, and gently filled the deep swales he had dug. It didn't destroy, it was captured. The violence of the storm was tamed by the geometry of the giant. The morning after the flood, the world smelled of iron and wet clay. That distinct scent, petrichor, hung heavy in the air. While the neighboring farms were stripped to the bedrock, their soil washed into the river, the Callaway land was breathing. It had drunk the storm and was satisfied. Mr. Callaway didn't speak to Silas that day. He didn't issue orders. The whip stayed coiled on the wall. He simply watched. He watched the way the giant moved through the mud, not fighting it, but stepping where the earth was firm, moving with a grace that defied the sounds. Fear in Callaway's heart had shifted into something else, a greedy curiosity. He realized he didn't own a beast of burden. He owned a secret weapon. To the world, his hands were hammers. To the earth, they were instruments of healing. Silas found a young peach tree, its branch snapped by the wind, hanging by a thread of bark. Most men would have chopped it down for firewood. Silas stopped. He worked with the precision of a surgeon. He bound the wound with wet moss and cloth, tying the knot with his teeth and one hand, gentle enough not to bruise the bark. He wasn't just fixing a tree, he was remembering. In his mind, he wasn't a slave.
In 1867, he was back in the high grasslands of his home, where his father taught him that a tree remembers trauma just like a man does. If you bind it with care, it grows back stronger at the break. The farm began to change. It wasn't just crops anymore, it was an orchestra. Silas planted marigolds between the vegetables to repel the beetles, a splash of orange against the green. He built houses for the bats to eat the moths at night. The air around the farm changed. It became sweeter, heavier with pollen and life. Callaway tasted the fruit, and for the first time he tasted the soul of the man he had bought. It was sweet, it was complex, and it was undeniable. The neighbors started to whisper. They stopped laughing at the giant fool and started lining up at the fence, staring in awe at the Eden growing in the middle of hell. They asked Callaway his secret. "I have a system," Callaway lied. He took the credit. He puffed out his chest. But Silas didn't care about credit. He cared about the bloom. He stood in the back, leaning on his hoe, listening to the wind rustle through the leaves he had saved. In this garden, he was not a slave. He was the king, and the soil bowed only to him. Success is a loud thing. The quiet sanctity of Silas's garden was shattered not by weather, but by envy. News of the miracle farm had traveled to the county seat. Men who had lost everything to the drought came to see the one man who hadn't. Callaway didn't turn them away. He welcomed them. He fed on their jealousy like a starving man at a banquet. They didn't come just to see the crops. They came to see the monster gardener. Callaway paraded Silas out like a prize bull. "Look at the hands," Callaway would boast, cigar smoke curling from his lips. "He smells the soil. He tastes the dirt." Callaway turned Silas's sacred connection to the earth into a parlor trick. He made the spiritual profane. Silas kept his head down, eyes fixed on a beetle crawling on a leaf, blocking out the noise of the men who thought they owned the world. Colonel Thorne didn't believe in miracles. He believed in luck. He looked at Callaway's thriving tobacco and spat on the ground. "It's a fluke, Callaway," Thorne boomed. "You got lucky with the rain. No primitive mind understands agriculture better than a trained botanist." The air grew thin. The birds seemed to stop singing. "This," Thorne announced, "is a vanilla orchid from Mexico. It is dying.
My best gardeners say it cannot be saved in this climate. If your giant is truly a wizard, let him save this. If he fails, you admit this farm is a fraud, and you sell him to me for field work." The pressure was immense. If he failed, he would be sold to Thorn, a man known for breaking slaves in the cotton fields. Silas knew this, but as he held the dying orchid, the fear evaporated. He felt the plant's pulse. It was faint, but it was there.
He worked for an hour. The sun beat down on his back. Sweat dripped from his nose, landing in the dust. He cleaned the roots. He adjusted the soil pH with ash. He created a microclimate by tenting his massive hands around the fragile leaves, using his own body heat and moisture to revive it. He hummed a low, vibrating sound, a song from his motherland, a song for the sick. He handed the pot back to Thorn. The colonel looked at the stem. He touched it. It was firm. The plant had drunk the water. It was fighting to live. Thorn's face went pale. He looked up at the giant, forcing his neck to crane back. There was no mockery left in his eyes, only a terrifying realization of inferiority. Calloway won the bet, but Silas lost his obscurity. He had proven too much. He was no longer just a strong back or a green thumb. He was a phenomenon, and men like Calloway do not let phenomenons rest. They squeeze them until they are dry. The enemy didn't come with guns or laws. It came with silence. In late October, a freak cold front swept down from the Appalachians. They called it a killing frost. It wasn't just cold, it was an execution. The temperature plunged 30 degrees in an hour. Calloway panicked. He screamed for the hands to cover the horses, to bring the livestock into the barn. He looked at the fields, the source of his new fame, his wealth, his pride, and he realized they were doomed. "Let it go," he shouted to the night. "It's over. Get inside. Save the mules." To him, the crops were just inventory. You cut your losses, you survive. "Get back in the shack, Silas," Calloway ordered, his teeth chattering. "You'll freeze to death out there. I paid too much for you to lose you to pneumonia. The plants are dead. Leave them." They are not dead yet. The cold was a physical weight. It bit through Silas's thin shirt. His fingers went numb, then burned, then went numb again. He carried buckets of warm water from the creek, pouring them near the roots to keep the ground from freezing. He took the burlap sacks from his own bed to cover the tomatoes. He had nothing left to give but himself. The giant looked at the fragile tree. He didn't hesitate. He took off his thin shirt. He wrapped it around the lower branches. But it wasn't enough. The frost was relentless. He held the tree like a father holds a feverish child. He whispered to it, the steam of his breath warming the bark. His skin turned pale, then blue. The frost began to settle on his broad shoulders, turning him white. He became the statue they thought they bought. But inside, the heart was beating slow and hard, pumping warmth into the thing he loved. He didn't do it for Calloway. He didn't do it for the county. He did it because he knew that life, any life, is a miracle worth dying for. When Calloway reached him, he thought he was looking at a corpse. The giant was still. His skin was the color of ash. The shirt he had wrapped around the tree was stiff with ice. Calloway fell to his knees. For years he had worried about losing his investment. Now, looking at the man who had given his own heat to save a tree, Calloway didn't feel the loss of money. He felt the crushing weight of shame. "You fool," Calloway whispered, his voice breaking. "You stubborn, beautiful fool." They dragged the giant back to the main house, not the shack, but the parlor of the main house. They laid him by the fire. It took 3 hours for the shivering to start, and when it did, it was violent, but it was life.
Silas was willing to freeze so that something beautiful could live. It's a level of dedication that most of us can barely comprehend. If this story is touching your heart right now, if you feel the weight of Silas's sacrifice, please take a second to leave a like. It's a small gesture, but it tells me that stories like this, stories about the hidden strength of the human spirit, need to be told. When Silas finally woke, he didn't ask for food. He asked about the garden. Calloway stood in the doorway, holding the orchid that had started the wager. It had bloomed, a single, perfect white flower. Calloway walked over and placed the pot in Silas's lap. "They lived," Calloway said quietly. "Everything lived." He looked at the giant's scarred hands resting on the quilt. The dynamic had broken. You cannot own a man who is greater than you. Calloway knew in that quiet room that the paperwork might say slave, but the reality said savior. The story of the ice giant spread, but it wasn't a carnival story anymore. It was a legend. Men looked at their own fields, then at their own hands, and wondered if they had ever cared for anything as much as Silas cared for that soil. We often judge people by what they look like. We see the mountain, but miss the gold mine inside. Silas forced them to look deeper. I want to ask you, what went through your mind when Silas walked into the freezing dark? Did you think he was foolish, or did you see the purest form of love? Share your heart in the comments below. Let's talk about what true dedication looks like. The frost didn't just break the drought, it broke the chains of the old world. Calloway couldn't go back to the way things were. He couldn't look at the man who had frozen for his future and call him property. "I cannot own you, Silas," Calloway said, his voice rough with emotion. "A man who commands the earth as you do belongs only to God." He handed over the papers, freedom and land. "You are not my servant," Calloway added, extending his hand, man to man. "You are my partner." Silas didn't leave. He built. The farm became a sanctuary of knowledge. He taught them that the soil has a memory. He taught them that if you take without giving, the land dies. He wasn't just growing food anymore. He was growing farmers. They called him the Green Giant now. The monster they feared had become the mentor they needed. He proved that true strength isn't about how much you can lift, destroy, or conquer. True strength is about what you can nurture. The hands that could crush a skull chose instead to cradle a seed. In 1867, they bought a body. They measured his height and weighed his muscle. They thought they knew his value, but they were wrong. His value wasn't in his size, it was in his soul. Silas showed the world that even in the harshest winter, love is the only thing that can keep the garden alive. He was a king in chains who freed himself not with violence, but with a rose. We all have a Silas in our lives, someone who is misunderstood, someone whose true worth is hidden beneath the surface. Or maybe that person is you. If this story moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Stories are like seeds. They only grow when you scatter them. Someone you love might be going through a winter right now. They might need to hear that their spring is coming. Share this with them. Tell them you see their true value. Be the one who helps them bloom. Thank you for watching, and